Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof, although I did an extra on Nigel Farage and his Ukrainian-Russian comments earlier. But this is a third normal video for Ukraine War News for the 25th of June 2024. I'm just supping on some Guinness ahead of the England Euro 2024 match. It's okay, it's non-alcoholic. Right, we're going to start with a quite big piece of news, really. The International Criminal Court, ICC, has found reasonable grounds to believe that Russia's former Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of General Staff Gerasimov, who appears to be kind of AWOL still, I mean, he's alive, but he's playing absolutely no part in the war, as far as I can see, intentionally caused great suffering to Ukrainian civilians by directing strikes on energy infrastructure. So I presume they are now, crimes against humanity, they are now issued with arrest warrants to go alongside, what's her name, Morova Belova, or whatever her name is, and Putin himself, obviously. And yeah, that is good news, because it's showing the world that A, Russia are the bad guys here, and B, that these guys are to be held accountable. It may not happen soon. It may never happen if they never leave Russia again, but it at least shows that the world is prepared to do the right thing and go along with the right protocols and procedures in order to hold these people to account. So that is a really significant piece of news. Now, another big one is that EU leaders have agreed to nominate two people. So one is Ursula von der Leyen for her second term as president of the EU Commission. That would be really good for Ukraine. What you want is stability and a kind of centrist, centre-right person who is very pro-Ukraine. I think von der Leyen is the right person for the job in terms of Ukraine, right? And then Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas is to fill the post, or nominated to fill the post of head of Euro diplomacy. That's held at the moment by Josep Borrell, the Spanish politician. And so both of those are going to be nominated to go through to Thursday, I think it is. Good news there. And von der Leyen herself has congratulated Moldova and Ukraine on opening accession negotiations. So they started today. This is, or I think they're probably due to start tomorrow, actually. This is very good news for both the people of Ukraine, Moldova, and the entire European Union, says von der Leyen. The path ahead will be challenging, but full of opportunities. Wishing you a successful start to the negotiations. Good news there. Ukraine will implement 11 Hungarian proposals on national minorities. The reason why I put this next is because Hungary have probably had to, no, they haven't had to make concessions. They have used leverage with Ukraine probably to get the accession talks, not vetoed by Hungary. And so one of the things they've been complaining about consistently has been the treatment of, there are a number of Hungarian minority communities, or there's a whole Zakarpattia over in the Carpathian Mountains. That kind of region has a lot of connection to Hungary, and you get there's a big diaspora Hungarian community there, and so they are going to be given more rights, I think, aligning to what Viktor Orban had been asking for. And Ukraine is going to implement 11 Hungarian proposals on national minorities. This was stated by Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. So she's going to obviously have quite a job ahead of her with the whole accession talks starting. Then we have another African country. Malawi has joined the final communique of the first peace summit, according to Zelensky, and that brings the total to possibly 84 or 85. I'm not quite sure whether it went down to 77 or 78. But nonetheless, that's good. We have an African nation in there. That is definitely what you would like to see. The Global South is missing largely from that communique. Now, Dagestan, I'm not going to go too much into depth here, but the incidents in Dagestan that happened the other day, where there were two incidents either side of Georgia, one in Derbent, one in Makhachkala, and actually one over the other side of Georgia as well. I thought there was an incident over there, so maybe even three incidents. But anyway, there were attacks in Dagestan carried out, it seems, by Islamic fundamentalists who were actually connected to the government. I think the son of is it the head of police or something? Anyway, those incidents that happened the other day that led to the death of at least, I think, 16 policemen, maybe 17, 6 terrorists and 3 civilians died. It might be more than that now, I don't know. But this is analysis here in The Guardian, but there have been a number of analyses. Vlad Vexler talks about that on his channel, about how actually there is a vulnerability back in Russia. And incidents like this really do show that there is a domestic fragility, arguably, to Russia. And I think that's something that Putin has to be very, very aware of, as he wants to keep a tight ship in terms of his domestic population, his citizens in the Russian Federation. But it's a very diverse federation, isn't it, going from west to east. And there are many different, there are different languages, different faiths. Of course, there are these big Muslim populations, and that might be something that he is struggling with somewhat at the moment. Switzerland wants to bomb Russia. Of course it doesn't, but that is a bit of fake news floating around. Switzerland is slowly awakening to the danger of Russian propaganda, says PS01, through Russian state-owned media. Priska Seiler-Graf, a Swiss MP, wants to ban RT, Russia Today, after over 140 fake articles about Switzerland have been published on RT's website since January. Of course, that would have been in the run-up to the Swiss Peace Summit. So it appears that RT is not banned there. Switzerland are not in the EU. The goal of RT is to divide Western societies by targeting specific groups. If Switzerland bans RT, it will then follow the EU policy on Russian state-owned media. I can't for the life of me see why they'd still have overt Russian propaganda allowed on their TV stations over there. So that to me, considering what Russia has done, and I see it, I know it's a neutral nation, so it's not as easy for Switzerland to see themselves at war with Russia, but it's just harmful to the public discourse, I think, to have Russia spurting overtly manipulative propaganda. Okay. EU countries will block access to the websites of RIA Novosti, Izvestia, Rossiyskaya Gazeta, and Voice of Europe. Voice of Europe has already been found out to be just a front for Russian disinformation due to propaganda. This is stated on the official journal of the EU. Blocking access to the sites of these media in the EU countries will begin on Tuesday, the 25th of June. That's today. Quote, these media outlets are under constant direct or indirect control of the leadership of the Russian Federation and play an important role in promoting and supporting Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, as well as destabilizing the situation in neighbouring countries, the EU Council said in a statement. I see, and if I was a member of the EU, I would be seeing the EU as embroiled in a war with Russia, a hybrid war, a war that's involving cyber warfare, information warfare, economic warfare, military warfare, given how much the EU is supporting Ukraine, financial warfare, etc., etc. And part of that warfare landscape is, as mentioned, the information spaces that act as a different area of abstract battlefields. And these are Russian weapons. These are Russian weapons used to attack the minds of people in the EU. I have absolutely no problem shutting that down. These are weapons of war. And we can have lovely debates about freedom of speech, but there's kind of talking about things in the marketplace of ideas, and there's sabotaging the marketplace. And there's manipulating as a state actor the minds of people in any given place, and I think this is dangerous, and I don't have a problem with the EU doing that. Right, I've given you a special on Nigel Farage, just to throw this extra one in there. The West must negotiate with Putin to break the stalemate in Ukraine, Reform Party leader Nigel Farage. The reason I'm saying this is because it aligns perfectly with what appears to be going on with Donald Trump at the moment. Quote, I believe the war has reached a complete stalemate. I believe the death toll is appalling. There have been no sensible substantive negotiations. I wonder why. And even if negotiations to find peace, to find a way forward, fail, I think it's better to have those negotiations than not. The Times quoted the politician as saying. Now, what I think is important to note here is that people like him, and then you look at David Sachs here. David Sachs is just an absolutely pro-Russian propagandist operating as Elon Musk's best mate as a voice piece for the Kremlin. He says Farage is trying to save the UK from itself. The bellicosity and Russophobia of the British media has never been greater, at the same time that its military has never been weaker. Of course, they will expect the Americans to save their bacon if it comes to that. We don't want World War III. And of course, anyone who David Sacks says is good, and anyone that's amplified by David Sacks goes straight away on my list of people not to support. So this doesn't surprise me at all. But my main point here is not to dwell on Nigel Farage any more than I already have, but it's just I sometimes wonder, and Farage has been an MEP and he's had a lot of dealings with Russia, but I wonder whether many people really have the full understanding of the war in Ukraine and what has led up to it and what's going on with it. Like you and I, we spend bonkers amounts of time ensconced in this geopolitical world where we are becoming more knowledgeable about politics in general, geopolitics, military, and the history of Ukraine. Literally the history of Ukraine and the history of how this war came to be. So we're in quite a privileged position now where we can look at certain people like Nigel Farage, who, some years ago I might have thought, well, he's a much more knowledgeable political operator than I am. But actually there are certain areas now where I think we can confidently say we are somewhat expert in. If you've been on this 2-year journey with me, we're taking what we already knew and we have expanded it incredibly. And when I spend 12 hours of every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, discussing Ukraine, right, and researching Ukraine. And he doesn't, and David Sacks doesn't. And so what they do is they skim off these information spaces that are echo chambers for their worldview, and they just skim off ideas, and it's just some big, it's going to be inappropriate. It's some big like circular way of just passing that information around and making themselves feel better about themselves. Just sometimes we just got to accept that you guys don't know enough, and we might know just a little bit more about how this war has come to pass, and I don't think you necessarily have the right to those opinions or the justification for those opinions that you have there. Anyway, that's my tuppence. I was before we just get on to the US, the Trump peace plan, so to call it. It's not quite that because he hasn't actually agreed to it, but it's his advisors have come up with a new peace plan. This is just a random bit of news that scares the crap out of me. Okay, so just talking about how authoritarian Russia is and how you can see purges of worldviews. So liberal worldviews, the liberal world order doesn't have a home in Russia at all. People who are political opposition are locked up and poisoned and thrown out of windows. And that is the kind of purge that you see. And that's what we absolutely are completely afraid of. And rightly so. It's despicable, and it's not how we want the world to be. And yet I look at this and I go, my goodness. And so it could come to pass. So this is a bit of news that's truly scary. Conservative-backed group is creating, and that is a Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation linked to Russia, actually, with its funding, some of its funding coming through Hungary, as I've shown you before. And this is a conservative organization that is behind this. So a conservative-backed group is creating a list of US federal workers it suspects could resist Trump plans. So it's doing an initial list to begin with. So with a $100,000 grant from the Heritage Foundation, the goal is to post 100 names of government workers. This is the American Accountability Foundation, so funded by the Heritage Foundation. It's going to post 100 names of government workers to a website this summer to show a potential new administration who might be standing in the way of a second-term Trump agenda and ripe for scrutiny, reclassifications, reassignments, or firing. They are basically in a kind of, not quite doxing, they are sort of doxing. They are publicly shaming people who have a particular political persuasion. There might be like pro-Democrat, anti-Trump people who are in government. the freedom, if you talk about freedom of speech, they have freedom of speech to say these things, but apparently they don't because they're going to be outed. And then as soon as Trump gets in, they'll just be fired. It'll be a purge of people so that you only have those who agree wholeheartedly with a certain way of thinking. And this looks like kind of Stasi-esque type approach. This is like Soviet era crapola going on here, and it's deeply, deeply scaring. We need to understand who these people are and what they do. The concept of compiling and publicizing a list of government employees shows the lengths Trump's allies are willing to go to ensure nothing and no one will block his plans to a potential second term. Jones's Project Sovereignty 2025 comes as Heritage is Project 2025, which is also is already the scariest piece of documentation I know of, lays the groundwork with policies, proposals and personnel ready for a possible new White House. So yeah, they're going to start with 100 and then move on to more, and I don't know, it just seems incredibly scary. I mean, yeah, you can go and look at the details here, lots more in this Associated Press article, but I just thought that was good ground to where we're going to go to next, which is, okay, given a possible Trump success in the presidential election in November, what's he going to do about Ukraine? Well, advisor Flights has said that Trump was presented with a strategy about Ukraine and reacted positively to it. However, he emphasized that this does not mean that Trump agreed to every word of the plan, but there is a plan. And Michael Clark from he's a military academic that is often analysing on Sky News, says, as we keep saying, all wars end if one side surrenders to aggression. And Putin's known terms are to be given even more Ukrainian territory than he sees so far. So this is what Putin has already said. He was talking about before the Swiss Peace Summit that there should be a ceasefire and a kind of negotiation where Ukraine gives up more of their territory. So that we know what Russia would do if they went to the table, and it would be nothing to do with ceding any of the territory they've just stolen already. Anyway, he would want all of that land plus other sweeteners, which might hold him off for a couple of years before the next attack. This is classic appeasement. And of course, you know, what Michael Clark is talking about, this classic appeasement, is what the Trump suggestion is. Okay, so Reuters reports this exclusive. Trump handed a plan to halt US military aid to Kyiv unless it talks peace with Moscow. But of course, if you're doing that, you're forcing both sides to the table now before military endeavors have come to a more favorable conclusion, say, for Ukraine. Like, if they're forced to the table now, or even in November, that's too soon. Ukraine are building up their army, they're upgrading it, they are training, they're getting ready for a point where Russia might well be so degraded that actually Ukraine can take advantage and take back some of that territory. Look at how well they've done with the air defenses at the moment. We've got F-16s coming online. We've got Crimea looking really, really vulnerable. The Black Sea fleet has been absolutely battered, and the rest of it sent to Novorossiysk. You've got a Kharkiv offensive of 50,000 soldiers reduced to an absolute disaster. And yet, if Ukraine were forced to the negotiating table now, this would only be for the benefit of Russia. And I think that's going to be the same for the next year. If they were forced to the negotiation table before they're ready, then that only plays into Russia's hands. Anyway, so Donald Trump, two key advisors have presented Trump with this plan if he wins the election. So let's have a look at what it says. Under the plan, drawn up by Kellogg and Fred Flights, who both served as chiefs of staff in Trump's National Security Council during the 2017 to 2021 presidency, there would be a ceasefire based on prevailing battle lines during peace talks. Flights said they had presented their strategy to Trump, and the Republican presidential candidate responded favorably. As mentioned, he doesn't agree to everything, but he seems up for it. So the strategy outlined by Kellogg and Flights is the most detailed plan yet by associates of Trump, who has said he could quickly settle the war in Ukraine if he beats Joe Biden in the November the 5th election, though he has not said how he would do that. The proposal would mark a big shift in the US position on the war and would face opposition from European allies within Trump's own and those within Trump's own Republican Party. The Kremlin said Any peace plan proposed by a possible future Trump administration would have to reflect the reality on the ground, but that Russian President Putin remained open to talks, so on and so forth. The value of any plan lies in the nuances and in taking into account the real state of affairs on the ground, said Dmitry Peskov. So, yes, I just want to know what further details there are that are laid out here. Obviously, it's not going to go down too well with Biden and the Democrats. The core elements of the plan were outlined in a publicly available research paper published by American First Policy Institute, a Trump-friendly think tank where Kellogg and Fleiss hold leadership positions. Kellogg said it would be crucial to get Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table quickly if Trump wins the election. Quote, we tell the Ukrainians you've got to come to the table, and if you don't come to the table, support from the US will dry up. So, this is the key. It's basically, if you don't come to the table, you will not get any support from US. US support will stop. And if Russia doesn't come to the table, we'll give extra support to Ukraine. He said, and you tell Putin he's got to come to the table. And if you don't come to the table, then we'll give Ukrainian everything they need to kill you on the field. So that sounds really good. But of course, if the situation there is one where, like it is presently, where Russia has all of that land still under their control, and they're looking to get more, then negotiations would only end up with Ukraine ceding more stuff necessarily to Russia and not being able to do anything about it. So I think it sounds like, oh, that's great. You know, if Russia will refuse to come to the table, they will get hammered by Ukraine being given everything. But that simply won't happen because Russia would go to the table. Russia would technically, I think, go to the table now and just have what they've been given and maybe argue for a bit more. And that is ostensibly as much of a win as they are going to get. Realistically, they're not going to get that land bridge to Odessa. Realistically, they're not going to take huge swathes of land more than what they've got now. But if they can keep Crimea, the Donbass, and a little bit more, you know, they want the whole of Zaporizhia, the whole of Donetsk, the whole of Luhansk, and the whole of Kherson. If they get all of those 4 areas, then they've got a huge bite of the Ukrainian economy. They've got a load of natural resources that they shouldn't have rights to have. They've just invaded. In 2014, they invaded and nicked it. In 2022, they invaded some more and nicked some more. So this is not a good suggestion in my books at all. According to the research paper, Moscow would be coaxed to the table with a promise of NATO membership for Ukraine being put off for an extended period. Russia invaded neighbouring Ukraine in February 2022. Until some gains by Russia in recent months, the front lines barely moved since the end of the year, despite tens of thousands dead on both sides in relentless trench warfare, the bloodiest fighting in Europe since World War II. Fleiss said Ukraine need not formally cede territory to Russia under their plan. Still, he said Ukraine was unlikely to regain effective control of all of its territory in the near term. So he's pretty much saying it there. Our concern is that this has become a war of attrition that's going to kill a whole generation of young men, he said. A lasting peace in Ukraine would require additional security guarantees for Ukraine. Kellogg and Fleiss said. Fleiss added that arming Ukraine to the teeth was likely to be the key element of that. But of course, you know, they've been promised that before in the Budapest Memorandum. The UK, France and US were part of that, and look where it's got them. President Trump has repeatedly stated that a top priority in the second term will be to quickly negotiate an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. And of course, if it's going to be quick, then it's not going to be decent and effective. But, you know, the upper hand, as it says here, some Republicans will be reticent to pay more resources to Ukraine under the plan. Okay, so that's your MAGA lot not wanting to help Ukraine anymore. They want to help them less. So there's a negotiation that requires arming the Ukrainians more and so on and so forth. Then they're not going to be up for it. What Trump supporters want to do is reduce aid, if not turn off the spigot, said Charles Kupchan, a senior fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations. Putin, see if there's any more. Several analysts also expressed concern that the plan by Kellogg and Fleiss could give Moscow the upper hand in talks. Exactly what my point is. Quote, what Kellogg is describing is a process slanted towards Ukraine giving up all of the territory that Russia now occupies, said Daniel Fried, a member of a former Assistant Secretary of State who worked on Russia policy. During a podcast interview last week, Trump ruled out committing US troops to Ukraine and appeared skeptical of making Ukraine a NATO member. He has indicated he will quickly move to cut aid to Kyiv if elected. So now already Trump is up for cutting aid. And this is almost more than what Trump would otherwise have been up for. So I don't know. It's just I'm just holding out hope that for Ukraine's sake, Trump doesn't win in the elections. Okay, confirmation that that should have been earlier. So yeah, Hungary's not going to block the move. Has pledged not to block the move in the Ukraine, Moldova, Ukraine joining the EU as accession talks get underway tomorrow. But remember, the bit I forgot to say earlier is that Hungary has a 6-month rotating presidency, so they'll be in charge of the EU, or presiding over the EU for 6 months as president, and they might make things a little bit difficult for Ukraine in that period. Anyway, back to the Trump plan here, and this is Randy Mott, who's a very pro-Ukrainian Republican who is not a massive fan of Trump, but here he's trying to put in what he sees as could be a good plan, so to stop Republican appeasement, as he calls it, as a Republican. So Mott says, Trump is entertaining the ridiculous idea that Ukraine must be pressured to give up territory to get peace. The story is leaked to the media to get our reaction. Hell no is the proper reaction. 1, Ukraine has compromised before the Budapest Accords and the 2014 occupation. This does not stop Kremlin aggression, but only allows it to be conducted whenever it is best for Russia. Exactly in what I kind of said earlier. 2, Russian peace at this point means forcing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to live under Russian occupation. That will include torture, executions, rape, looting, and repopulation schemes to destroy their homes. 3, Putin wants a victory that at least gives him the land he already illegally seized and allows him time to plan for the next attack in 2 to 3 years when he's restored his army. Appeasing him now only empowers him for new attacks. 4, we are seeing the erosion of Russian influence on a massive scale, i.e. Vietnam electing to be a US ally. That's a recent one. Middle Eastern nations working with the US on peace in the Middle East. A US retreat from Ukraine that goes against the 74-nation peace plan, actually now 80 odd, would be a disaster for our influence. The US would no longer be viewed as a reliable ally. 5, Ukraine would not surrender if US aid were ended. They would get more help from Europe without us. They would fight on and more would die. The US would be viewed like the Chamberlain of the 21st century. No MAGA, folks, but American... but no MAGA, as in not America making America great again, but America the mirage that vanishes when you get close. 6, China would see this as a green light to take Taiwan. Ask the folks in Taiwan. They support the 74-nation plan, not appeasement of Russia. 7, Republicans would lose the national security voters for the foreseeable future. All those continuing to vote for Haley would be more likely to not vote for Trump or support a party led but in this direction in future elections. We would become the party of appeasement and give the Democrats the national security mantle. 8, the US is spending 5 to 6% of its annual DoD budget, Department of Defense budget, to destroy the Russian conventional military capability and prove that the world that our promises mean something. Budapest 1994. This is a bargain right now. It could almost have no budget impact if we stop backfilling using the stored equipment book value to purchase new equipment that does not go to Ukraine. Use Lend-Lease. Most of the stuff we give was already paid for 20 years ago. 9, Putin will not negotiate in good faith. Witness his last peace proposal, which is what he keeps everything he illegally occupies and gets... the English is a bit funky here. Putin will not negotiate in good faith. Witness his last peace proposal, which is that he keeps everything he illegally occupies and gets more of Ukraine in the deal, kind of what I just said earlier. 10, the notion of forcing a peace plan depends on what the plan is. There is no plan from the Trump advisors suggesting anything real or viable. Simply offering to cede territory will incentivize the Kremlin to keep going to get more. 11, finally, no single step taken by an incoming Trump administration could be more damaging to our country or party than to embrace appeasement. This is especially true when Ukraine is winning on the ground and Russia is feeling the huge losses and economic squeeze. 74 nations got on board with full support of the Russian being pushed out of Ukraine, abandoning an ally that is winning, fighting one of our chief enemies, supported by virtually the whole world, would destroy American deterrence. If the US will not support an ally that can win, what will we do where the local ally is incapable of winning without US combat involvement? Our enemies will read this as proving we will stay home. That will create the greatest risk of World War III since 1945. Of course, that's really well stated, that you are setting the US up to be seen as a weak ally and giving permission for other nations to push the envelope. As Ronald Reagan said, a small nation faced with the denial of its sovereignty, indeed of its very existence, reminded us that the price of freedom is high, but never so costly as the loss of freedom. Well said there. Okay, moving on. Macron. So excellent meeting with President Emmanuel Macron, says Jens Stoltenberg, the outgoing Secretary General of NATO, in Paris to prepare for the NATO summit in Washington. More support to Ukraine will be our most urgent task. We also take steps to continue strengthening NATO's deterrence and defence. As always, France plays a key role. It's such a shame that France is so politically paralysed at the moment and looking like it's going in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, Modi is planning to go to the Kremlin to visit the nationalistic leader of India. Kremlin announced the upcoming visit of Indian Prime Minister Modi in Russia, his first since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. The exact dates are yet to be confirmed. Modi last visited Russia in 2019 and recently spoke with Putin by phone in early June. And this is the problem, is that as people normalise this war, people forget that, initially Russia was a pariah state. No one go and visit them because they've done bad things. And then 2.5 years later, people are like, well, I might as well go and visit them now. Yeah, whatever. And of course, time is this great healer, we know. But time is a great mechanism to normalise things and allow us to forget how terrible Russia had been. And India is just feeling emboldened to go and see their BRICS buddy here. So I think that is a real shame. Despite the ongoing war, India has not condemned Russia's invasion and abstained from signing the final communique of a recent international peace conference in Switzerland, emphasising the need for Russia's involvement in peace discussions. And then finally, Russia have made a decent policy proposal, or at least someone in this Duma has suggested something sensible. What is that? Russian State Duma Deputy Dmitro Gusev has proposed to close beaches located near strategic and military facilities in Sevastopol and Kuban. Yeah. So as we saw, and I'll show you some footage from it tomorrow, there was either an ATACMS that exploded early over that beach, or it was taken out by air defense and exploded over that beach, or air defense itself exploded over that beach. One of those three options seems to be what happened. And over the water, you've got these massive bits of shrapnel or cluster munitions or whatever they are. You don't quite know, but falling down in the water, and then a few on the beach. And then Russians going, that's freaking terrible. There was a really good analysis sent in by a Kiwi, actually, to Ukraine, the latest podcast, that said everyone involved in this process needs to take responsibility. So Ukraine needs to take responsibility when targeting Russian military targets in terms of mitigating against civilian deaths and whatnot. But actually, Russia need to do that as well. In fact, even more so, right? So it's Russia's, and this is actually under Geneva Convention. I read you Article 58 the other day. A, B, and C from Article 58 clearly state this, and Russia should. There were no air raid sirens. There was no sensible legislation like no holidaying right next to somewhere that's already been bombed a couple of times. No lying on a beach next to a military airport, like. The obvious things like that. So Russia have an awful lot of responsibility, but there's also some other interesting ones. Like those civilians have a responsibility to themselves. Like, don't go around saying that's like going and for example, if I took a holiday up, Mount Vesuvius, right, or Mount Etna, I was like, oh, do you know what? I have a nice sunbathing holiday this year. I'm going to go to Mount Etna and just hang around the edge. Oh my goodness, it's just exploded and I've been killed by lava. Like, that's my responsibility for doing something so damned stupid and irresponsible and reckless as taking a holiday at the top of an active volcano. Russian people know that Crimea is a war zone. They know that Sevastopol is a naval port that's been hammered. Like, they know that, right? Going on holidaying in Sevastopol and going to a beach next to a military airbase where you can see the radar towers and whatnot on the headland, I think, from there. They have responsibility in that as well. And so don't just think it's the two warring partners. But yeah, I think that it is under the laws of war. That's clearly a viable military target. And the Russians need to be thinking very hard about how they use Crimea and whether it really should be the holiday destination that they would hope. And the Russian State Duma deputy here is probably proposing something fairly sensible. Anyway, that's enough for me. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share. Really appreciate your support. I'm going to go enjoy the football. It's already started. Oh dear, I'm going to be in trouble with my own brain. Speak to you tomorrow.